Hey friends, it's Jimmy quickly dropping in with a reminder to like and subscribe and to hit that notification bell. On November 14th, 1908, German General Dietrich von Hulsen-Hasler suffered a fatal heart attack during a hunting party gathering in honor of Kaiser Wilhelm II. The gathering was held at Donaueschingen Castle in the Black Forest, where Hulsen-Hasler, a longtime imperial aide, felt comfortable indulging in some after-dinner theatrics. That evening, the 56-year-old general decided to entertain the Kaiser and guests by performing a ballet. He donned a pink tutu with a wreath of roses on his head and began dancing like a ballerina to everyone's amusement. In the midst of this comedic performance, after executing playful pirouettes and blowing kisses, the general suddenly collapsed and couldn't be revived. The bizarre manner of his death was quickly hushed up by the military establishment, and official reports at the time blamed a heart attack while on a hunting trip. Not technically a lie, of course, but clearly the most interesting part of what happened to him wasn't deemed fit for public consumption. Russia's Yaroslavl Oblast has one of the more peculiar regional flags in the world, a black bear standing upright and shouldering a giant halberd on a yellow field. According to legend, in the year 1010, Prince Yaroslav the Wise visited the site where the city of Yaroslavl now stands. The local inhabitants, hoping to scare off the foreign prince, released their secret weapon, a ferocious live bear, from a cage. Unfazed, Yaroslav confronted the charging animal and slew the bear with a single swing of his halberd. Somehow this didn't earn him the nickname Yaroslav the Bear Slayer, but I guess he already had a pretty decent appellation. In the aftermath, he razed the existing settlement and founded a new town on that spot, and wisely named it after himself. The bear, once a menace, was now enshrined as a protective symbol of the city, and by the 17th century, this creature was officially added to the coat of arms. In the early 15th century, King Taejong of Korea learned that not even a king's embarrassment could evade the record books. By way of background, the Koreans had a tradition where every single action and activity of their king would be recorded. According to the royal annals of Joseon, the name of Korea at the time, Taejong was out on a hunting trip when an unexpected mishap occurred. As he was drawing his bow to shoot a deer, his horse stumbled, and the king was thrown off, hitting the ground. Taejong wasn't injured in any meaningful way, but he was certainly embarrassed and had a reputation to uphold. Glancing around at his entourage, he reportedly gave an order, quote, "Do not let the historians know about this." In other words, the king wanted his fall kept secret, omitted from the official record. But the Korean court historians were famously scrupulous, and beyond even the king's control. The royal scribe who witnessed the incident dutifully recorded everything. Not only was Taejong's fall noted in the annals, but so was the king's own attempt to cover it up. Later generations reading the veritable records of King Taejong could see that on that day, the king fell off his horse and tried to censor the fact. This anecdote has been passed down as a prime example of the integrity and independence of Korea's court historians. Interestingly, this fact has actually enhanced the reputation of these historical records for modern scholars. After all, it showed that everything ended up in the official annals, warts and all. Napoleon Bonaparte, the mighty emperor of the French, was famously once swarmed by a massive horde of rabbits while at the height of his power. And quick note here, I had thought of putting in a picture of Napoleon for this segment, but I decided to go with some real tough customers instead. The incident occurred in July 1807, after Napoleon had signed the treaties of Tilsit, ending a war with Russia. To celebrate, his chief of staff, Alexandre Berthier, organized a grand rabbit hunt for the emperor and his generals. Berthier collected 3,000 rabbits and had them caged around a field. When the hunt began, the rabbits were released. But instead of fleeing, they did the unthinkable. The rabbits bolted straight toward Napoleon and his party. According to legend, the bunnies recognized the man who had been feeding them amongst Napoleon's party. At first, Napoleon laughed off the onrush of fuzzy creatures, but soon the sheer number of rabbits overwhelmed the group. The swarm surrounded Napoleon, some bunnies even hopping onto him. His men tried to beat them back, and Napoleon swiped with his riding crop, but the relentless rabbits kept coming. Eventually, Napoleon was forced to retreat to his carriage. Remarkably, even as the coach rolled away, the bunnies continued chasing. According to some versions of this story, these creatures even infiltrated the imperial carriage, causing further commotion for the emperor and his men. The mystery was soon solved. Berthier had procured tame rabbits from local farmers instead of wild hares. These rabbits, having been kept hungry for the event, saw the men as food givers rather than predators. Unfortunately, though, the story, while it may be entertaining, might not be entirely true. There's a whole bunch of supposedly true accounts of Napoleon out hunting and getting overwhelmed by ordinary, non-threatening animals. Some have suggested that this rabbit story was invented by his enemies, likely the British, in hopes of making the mighty Napoleon look like a bit of a silly goose. That said, some stories are just too good not to repeat, and I think that's why this story still continues to spread over 200 years later. One mind-bending timeline fact is that Cleopatra, the famous last queen of Egypt, lived closer in time to the moon landing than to the building of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Cleopatra VII died in 30 BC, a full 2,500 years after the Great Pyramid was completed around 2,560 BC. Yet her death came only about 2,000 years before Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon in 1969. This seemingly counterintuitive fact underscores just how old the Egyptian pyramids are. The Great Pyramid was ancient history to the people we now refer to as ancients. Now for another weird timeline fact. Oxford University is so old that it predates the Aztec Empire by centuries. There's evidence of teaching at Oxford as early as 1096, and the university had established formal colleges by the 13th century. By contrast, the Aztec people didn't found their capital city of Tenochtitlan until 1325 AD, and the Aztec Empire's formation is often dated to 1428. In other words, Oxford University was already a venerable center of learning long before the Aztec civilization rose to its peak. In fact, when Oxford scholars were debating philosophy and theology in medieval England, the future Aztecs were still nomadic tribes, slowly migrating toward the Valley of Mexico. Klaus Stortebeker was a notorious German pirate of the 14th century, and his execution in 1401 spawned a gruesome legend. Stortebeker led the Victual Brothers, a league of pirates who terrorized the Baltic and North Seas. Eventually, he was captured by the city of Hamburg, along with 70 members of his crew. All were sentenced to death by beheading. Before the execution, Stortebeker reportedly struck a deal. He asked that as many of his men be spared as his headless body could walk past after decapitation. According to the legend, when Stortebeker was beheaded, his corpse astonishingly began to stagger forward. The headless pirate managed to walk past 11 of his comrades before the executioner finally tripped the body with a foot, causing it to fall. According to legend, despite this eerie feat, the authorities didn't honor the bargain, and those 11 men were executed along with the rest of the crew. You'd think this is where the Hamburgers would stop mincing up men, but that's where you'd be wrong. The executioner, for his part, found his own head on the chopping block after he started boasting that he had the energy to keep chopping. He supposedly even went a step further and said that he even had enough energy to chop up all the burghers of Hamburg. These burghers of Hamburg were the wealthy city dwellers who controlled the Hanseatic city during the medieval period. This apparent joy for slaughter, and the perhaps joking threat to the ruling class, was a bridge too far for the Hamburger burghers, who ordered his execution. This, of course, raises the question of who executes the executioner in this sort of situation, but I guess the Hamburgers worked it out. While the factual truth of the legend is doubtful, the tale has since become a part of pirate folklore. One of the most macabre episodes in papal history was the Cadaver Synod of 897, when, to give you the elevator pitch, a dead pope was put on trial. I've previously done a long-form video on this topic, so I'll keep it brief here, but honestly it's just too bizarre not to include in my inaugural episode in this series. Pope Stephen VI, in January 897, had the corpse of his predecessor, Pope Formosus, exhumed, dressed in papal robes, and seated on the papal throne. A deacon was appointed to speak on behalf of the deceased pontiff, but not in the role of some sort of advocate or defense attorney. Rather, this man was charged with role-playing as the deceased man, while the corpse was sitting rotting on the papal throne itself. If you're one of those people who just listen, I've included a painting by Jean-Paul Laurent that perfectly captures this moment and the extreme absurdity of it. Stephen VI accused the corpse of Formosus of various crimes: perjury, coveting the papacy, and violating church law. The role-playing deacon responded that he did everything he was accused of, and he deserves the strictest punishment imaginable. I'm probably not going to shock you here when I say the corpse was found guilty, dead to rights. Formosus's defiled body was then dragged out and cast into the Tiber River, but loyalists ended up rescuing the corpse. The bizarre trial horrified observers and quickly turned public opinion in Rome against Pope Stephen VI. A few months later, an uprising deposed Stephen, who was imprisoned and likely strangled to death. The church, embarrassed by the whole affair, later reversed Formosus's conviction, and the next pope reburied Formosus with honor and nullified the Cadaver Synod's decrees. That said, even with the reversal, the next century or so would be a real low point for the papacy in terms of behavior of popes. Pope Benedict IX, for instance, makes Stephen VI look like a saint in comparison, but that's a story for another video. For centuries, sailors kept a ship's cat on board vessels as both a helper and a mascot. Cats served a very practical role on ships. They hunted rats and mice, which could otherwise chew through ropes, damage woodwork, eat provisions, and spread disease. These furry friends also adapted well to life at sea and provided companionship to crew members during long voyages. Many a lonely sailor found comfort in the ship's cat, and it became a beloved part of the crew, offering a sense of home and camaraderie on the open ocean. Beyond their pest control duties, cats accrued a fair amount of maritime lore. They were considered lucky animals by sailors, sometimes even thought to have supernatural abilities to ward off storms. Cats with extra toes were especially prized on ships, as some believed the extra digits gave them better balance on deck. Ship's cats were banned in Britain's Royal Navy in the 1970s, soon after the banning of the daily rum ration for sailors, and things have never really been the same. One of history's strangest disasters struck Boston's North End on January 15, 1919. This event would come to be known as the Great Molasses Flood. On that day, a giant storage tank containing 2.3 million gallons of molasses ruptured suddenly, sending a sticky tidal wave sweeping through the city streets. Witnesses described a long, deep rumble, then an explosion of molasses. A brown flood, reportedly 15 to 30 feet high and moving as fast as 35 miles per hour, rushed out like a sugary tsunami. The wave crushed buildings, snapped the steel supports of an elevated train track, and picked up carriages like toys. Anything and anyone in its path was engulfed by the sticky mass. While this story is often related in a hilarious way, The consequences, unfortunately, were anything but funny. The disaster was devastating, and at least 21 people lost their lives after being asphyxiated by the thick goo. Ketchup's story is far older and far stranger than the familiar red condiment suggests, because the original version didn't contain a single tomato. The earliest form came from southern China, where fishers and traders produced a fermented brine made from fish entrails, soybeans, and salt. This mixture, known as Ketchup, was prized for its sharp, savory depth and long shelf life. It spread through maritime routes to Southeast Asia, where English sailors encountered it in the 17th century and brought the idea home. Western cooks tried to recreate the flavor using ingredients they had on hand, leading to a wave of experimental ketchups made from mushrooms, anchovies, walnuts, plums, and oysters. These early British and American versions were dark and tangy, nothing like modern ketchup. Tomatoes didn't enter the picture until the early 19th century, when American cooks began adapting the recipe. Tomatoes had been viewed with suspicion since their discovery as part of the Columbian Exchange in the 16th century. The Spanish or Portuguese originally brought them back to Europe from South America, where they were classified as nightshade plants and believed to be poisonous. In the 19th century, Americans became fascinated with tomatoes and began to treat them as the safe and edible fruits we know and love today. This in turn led to the development of ketchup as one of the most recognizable condiments in the world. Personally, I never would have guessed that ketchup's roots laid in a Chinese fermented sauce. The shortest war in recorded history took place on the morning of August 27, 1896, and it lasted only about 38 minutes. This was the Anglo-Zanzibar War, a brief conflict between the British Empire and the East African island Sultanate of Zanzibar. The war erupted after the Sultan of Zanzibar died, and a cousin, Khalid bin Bargash, seized the throne without British approval. The British, who had a protectorate over Zanzibar, delivered an ultimatum demanding Khalid step down. When the deadline passed, British warships in Zanzibar's harbor opened fire on the royal palace at 9 o'clock that morning. They bombarded the palace and the Sultan's artillery until, by 9:38, the guns fell silent, and the Sultan's flag was cut down. In that extremely short span, the war was over. Zanzibar surrendered, and a pro-British Sultan was installed. Despite its brevity, the war was violent. For Zanzibar, the toll was heavy. About 500 of the Sultan's soldiers and civilians were killed or wounded in the bombardment. On the British side, only one sailor was injured. The newly enthroned Sultan quickly conceded to British demands, including paying reparations for the shells fired. For his part, the Sultan hopped over the Zanzibar Channel into German East Africa, where he would continue to be a nuisance for the British, advocating for the Germans to return him to the throne. In the 1860s, Western traders were desperate to open up Korea to commerce, and one German merchant went to outrageous lengths to try to force it. Ernst Oppert, a businessman based in Shanghai, hatched a crazy plan to literally hold a royal corpse hostage to gain trade access. Oppert plotted to steal the remains of a royal ancestor of Korea's ruling regent, Heungseon Daewon-gun. The target was the tomb of Daewon-gun's father, Prince Namyeon. The idea was to exhume the body and ransom the bones back to the regent in exchange for Korea agreeing to open its ports to foreign trade. In the spring of 1868, Oppert put this ghoulish plan into action. He sailed to Korea with a band of armed men and trekked inland to the tomb site in South Chungcheong province. They dug into the grave, but struck a solid stone vault and could not break it open. Worse, local villagers discovered the sacrilege and flew into a fury. They formed a posse to put down the insane clowns that were trying to loot the body. A skirmish erupted. 2 of Oppert's men were killed in the clash, and the rest fled back to their ship empty-handed. The audacious plot completely backfired. Rather than cowing the Koreans, it outraged them and only strengthened the regent's resolve to keep his country closed off. Oppert's brazen act was widely denounced abroad, and Korea remained as isolated as ever, despite this cartoonishly buffoonish attempt. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments and consider sharing it with your friends and family.